When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comics YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about something that's I've always hinted at in a couple videos and talked about, but this one's going to be talking about how I believe Littlefinger might have started Robert's Rebellion. And it's a question I don't know if we're ever going to get asked, but the big idea of today's video is, how did Brandon Stark find out that Lyanna had been abducted or taken or whatever from Rhaegar? So for me, that is the big question we have to ask. And there's a lot of people that meet up in the same areas, so it's something that I think is going to be interesting to talk about. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to subscribe, like, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow and reach other people and might like this content as well. And let's get into the video. So if you guys have not watched my Night of the Laughing Tree video, I would strongly recommend watching that before this one. I will have a card up on the top for you guys if you want to watch that before this one. But the summary of that video is that I believe Lyanna was the Night of the Laughing Tree, and I believe because of Rhaegar trying to figure out who this person was, he ends up finding Benjen, because Benjen would have been the one that got like the armor and a horse, because he says he could do that. And I think that ends up with Rhaegar meeting Lyanna. So I think that Rhaegar and Lyanna had some sort of attraction already towards each other, so that when she is kind of crowned for her beauty, it's not a random thing, it's that Rhaegar did this intentionally and they'd actually met already. So if we kind of look at the Tourney of Harrenhal and where all of our characters go after this point, we have Littlefinger, who's a big character. We don't have 100% confirmation that he was at the Tourney of Harrenhal, but I think it would have been assumed he was there. He was kind of a ward for Hoster Tully, and he always seemed like he kind of went with the girls and stuff like that. So I think he would have been here. It makes sense. We don't have confirmation on that, so that might be something that's a little interesting. But the big thing I want to note of why Littlefinger being here makes a big difference. Because if Littlefinger's here, he knows what Lyanna looks like. And two, he also knows what Rhaegar looks like for certain. Now, Rhaegar is a lot easier to kind of tell out. Rhaegar has very distinct features, but Lyanna, he knows what she looks like. That's big and key when we go on to later on. Now, if we look at where, again, other characters go, so we have Littlefinger goes back to River Run with Catelyn, Lysa, and then Brandon Stark also goes back there as well. Now, another thing I want to talk about before we leave the Tourney of Harrenhal is that Brandon Stark was someone that was very impulsive and had to almost be restrained when Lyanna had been, crowned the Queen of Beauty and all that. So this shows you how quick to anger Brandon is, and I want you guys to remember that when we get to a certain part of the video. But all of these characters go back, and we have Brandon, who kind of goes to visit with Catelyn for a while before they end up getting married and all that stuff. And also Lord Rickard Stark, he is kind of going to be coming down south again for the wedding, and Benjen Stark ends up going back to Winterfell for the rest of the war and all that stuff until Ned comes back. So the big key point here is that Littlefinger, right, had this obsession for Cat, and then Lysa had one for him, and Lysa ends up sleeping with Littlefinger. Littlefinger thinks it's Catelyn and all that stuff. Very fucked up situation. But yeah, that ends up happening. Now, we had the whole duel thing where Brandon ends up kind of injuring Littlefinger because Catelyn wants him, to not kill him and all that. So already you kind of have one thing where Littlefinger kind of puts a stain on the Tully house, in my opinion. Doing this was kind of weird. Cat had already been betrothed, and she obviously wanted Brandon over Littlefinger. And then it gets worse, because then Littlefinger gets Lysa pregnant. And now you've done two not good, right? These are both not good. Already Littlefinger was going to be sent back to the Fingers after the Catelyn and Brandon thing, but once this happens, Littlefinger has to leave. Littlefinger basically, he's got to go. He's still injured and stuff like that, but he's got to go. Hoster Tully is furious. He wants him out. And Lysa, as we know, takes the moon tea, and that, child is no more. But the key point here is Littlefinger has to go back to basically the Vale, and he ends up having to probably take the main road, and will end up at the Crossroad Inn. This is an inn where you can get some self swords and all that to get back into the Vale. and stuff like that. Better to, not travel alone and injured and all that. And then another key thing that we know is that Brandon Stark at this time ends up going away. He says he has like an errand to run basically from Cat. And this can be assumed of one of two things. We know how compulsive Brandon is. And this is a guy, Littlefinger, that has just insulted your wife's house twice, more or less. He is someone that I could very easily see going after Littlefinger and killing him. Or you can go the other way too. Either way you go with this and what Brandon's was leaving for and his motivations, they still make sense. So the other thing would be his father was coming down, south and all that, and was coming for the wedding. So maybe he was going to meet up with his father. Now, that is one side of it that we need to talk about. The other side is going to be Rhaegar and Lyanna. Now, something that I think is very interesting, because I think most people believe that it wasn't an abduction. I think they both were attracted to each other, and I think they willingly went with each other. Now, Lyanna, where does Lyanna go? It's not made clear where Lyanna goes, but I think we can kind of assume that she kind of stays around Harrenhal or in that area, right? She doesn't go to Riverrun. She doesn't go back up north, because the timing would not make sense. So we know she stayed in the area. We're going to assume, I think in this video, makes sense that she stays in Harrenhal, right? Now, another thing is that we have, at this point, this was being led by the Went family, and one of the Kingsguard for Rhaegar was a Went. So it makes a lot of sense, and Rhaegar would be able to send a lot of messages to Harrenhal through his Kingsguard to Lyanna. Now, this is key because, for one, Rhaegar knows where Lyanna is, right? When they get together, right, he's not just wandering around the Riverlands looking for her. He knows where to find her. So another key thing is, if we're saying that Lyanna stays at Harrenhal, which I think is very likely, but she could have been somewhere else, maybe around there, like Derry or somewhere around there, we know that she ends up going missing at a certain time. Now, what I think is interesting is, I think eventually what ends up happening is Rhaegar and Lyanna are like, let's meet up and all that. And where do you think they would meet up? Where do you think they would go? Right? The Crossroad Inns, which is only about a day's ride maybe from Harrenhal. That is probably where they would meet up. Now, Rhaegar, I think, would agree to this, and then they would probably go back to Dragonstone and all that, or not Dragonstone, but the Tower of Joy and all that stuff. We know what ends up happening there, right? But think about it like this now. Littlefinger also would have been at the Crossroad Inns. He would have been waiting to get some bodyguards and stuff like that. And also, the big key thing here is winter is kind of here, right? The spring's gone and all that stuff. Winter is now here. And we see that it's very difficult to get into the Vale and all that stuff during winter. And it's something not smart to do, right? So Littlefinger was probably going to wait here for quite a while, as we can be believed. And we also know that Brandon Stark, somewhere along the road, gets the information that Lyanna has been abducted. Now, it would seem very likely, the way we know Littlefinger is very observant and stuff like that, I think that he had been at the Crossroad Inns and he sees Lyanna come into the Crossroad Inns. This is the key point. Littlefinger would know who Lyanna is, being at the tourney of Harrenhal. And this would be something very interesting, right? A very highborn girl all by herself. And Lyanna probably at this point knew that this needed to be a secret and was probably looking kind of like she was waiting for someone, right? The Starks are not good at hiding their emotions or what's going on with them, like mentally and all that stuff. So I think it's very believable that Littlefinger could have seen her and maybe followed her if she like went out to meet Rhaegar at the stables or something like that, and seen that maybe her and Rhaegar left. So here's the next point. Brandon Stark then would arrive at the Crossroad Inns. Seeing Littlefinger there, either way you go with this, right? Either way that he was going to see his father, or maybe he was coming after Littlefinger, trying to hunt him down because of the disrespect that he did to both Lysa and Catelyn. Do you think Brandon Stark at this point would be on the edge of trying to kill Peter or at least beat the shit out of him? Now, if you're Littlefinger, what is the only piece of information that is going to deflect all the anger from you to someone else? Also, does it make sense that Brandon learns this information from a key character within the story? I believe that Littlefinger, kind of seeing the situation and knowing that he can't fight Brandon, he understands that he can't do it. He almost died the first time, and Brandon was going kind of easy on him. I believe that Littlefinger, very similarly to kind of how he does in the normal story, tells Brandon that, you know, Rhaegar abducted Lyanna. Maybe true, maybe not true. It doesn't matter at this point. Littlefinger is using this to get out of this situation and make Brandon do something stupid. And Littlefinger also would know that this is a fantastic way to get Brandon Stark killed. Let's say he even finds Rhaegar. Rhaegar is a very competent swordsman. We know Arthur Dayne was there as well with him. Brandon Stark would be killed. Now, if Brandon Stark, what he does in the normal timeline where he goes to King's Landing, gets in prison, dies again, this all works out perfectly for Littlefinger. And maybe Littlefinger wasn't planning to cause a war, but this gets rid of his main enemy at this point. Catelyn Stark would be free and be single again, and maybe Littlefinger holding on to this kind of a fool's hope that he could get Catelyn, it all plays out well for him. And we look at all the events that follow. Littlefinger definitely gains power because of the following events. And it also would make a ton of sense for how Littlefinger kind of comes to his conclusion that chaos is a good thing, right? That's how you gain power. And that, to me, could be how he got that, because he sees how well it worked in Robert's Rebellion. So let me know what you guys think about this one. I know it's kind of a far-fetched one because, again, we don't know a ton of information about Robert's Rebellion. And we probably won't until the series is kind of finished. And maybe George will never answer some of these questions as well, but I think it makes a ton of sense that the reason Brandon Stark kind of finds out this information is through Littlefinger. Because think about it. Think about how this information would have happened, right? Let's say maybe a random person at the inn or on the road tells him that they saw Lyanna kind of kidnap, or Rhaegar kidnap Lyanna. For one, a lot of people probably wouldn't have known who Lyanna was in the first place. So, again, you're kind of playing a game where someone had to have known who both of them were. And also, for a commoner to think this, they would have had to have been kind of thinking, okay, maybe Rhaegar snatched her away or took her away in a way that looked like he was kidnapping her, which I just don't think is what happened. I think Rhaegar and Lyanna just went off together and there was not really any forced kind of thing going on there. So for me, it makes a lot of sense for Littlefinger to lie about what was happening and for Littlefinger to actually be the one that actually causes Robert's Rebellion. So thank you guys all for watching this video. I hope you guys liked this theory. It's one that I've had for a while. It was kind of amplified by In Deep Geeks video he made on this a while ago, but I think he always makes great material, and I think it's something that is really cool to look at. If you think about it, Littlefinger basically started 2 civil wars in his entire lifetime, which is insane. But I think it would add a lot to Littlefinger's character where he learned all of these skills, because Littlefinger is a character that we're never really told how he learned all of this, how he came behind his philosophy of chaos and all that stuff. And I think this is a great way to incorporate it and to understand how he came to that conclusion. Also, I think it gives a lot better motivation for why Brandon ended up going to King's Landing and all that stuff and wanting Rhaegar's head. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.